Welcome to the debate. Today is Monday, January 26th, 2026. We are currently living through a moment where the sheer volume of synthetic information, generated by AI agents, has officially outpaced human cognitive processing. We are drowning in data, but starving for wisdom. So today we're tackling a question of survival. Really, is Zen Buddhism just an aesthetic for Silicon Valley elites, a way to decorate their offices with rocks and sand? Or is it actually a necessary operating system for the human mind to survive in an AI-saturated economy? Specifically, can these ancient concepts like Shoshin and Mushin provide a measurable return on investment, or are they just romantic distractions from the hard math of business?
Yeah, happy to be here. And I'll just state my position clearly right from the jump. When I look at the global economy in 2026, which runs on nanosecond trading algorithms and just massive agentic data processing, the idea that we need to look backward to, 13th century monastic practices feels like a fundamental category error. I am deeply skeptical that emptying the mind is the solution when the market is explicitly demanding we fill our minds with actionable high-velocity data. If you're a CEO today, you need more compute, not more cushions.
Right, and I understand that impulse, I really do. You want to fight fire with fire, or in this case, data with more data. But my argument is that in 2026, information isn't a scarce resource anymore. It's a commodity, and it's basically infinite. The scarcity today is clarity. So I'm arguing that Zen, in this context, shouldn't be seen as a religion, but as a technology of the mind. It's a cognitive framework, a distinct operating system that people like Steve Jobs used to disrupt entire industries. Without this specific OS, I think modern leaders are just going to burn out trying to compete on processing speed against machines that will always be faster.
But business is won by expertise. It's won by relentless execution, by precision. If I'm a shareholder, I want a CEO who is obsessively analyzing the competition, the regulatory landscape, not, waiting for a moment of satori or enlightenment. We have this tendency in tech to romanticize the samurai discipline, but we ignore the reality that modern tech requires deep technical expertise. We're building neural networks here, not tea houses.
I think that binary view, neural networks versus tea houses, is exactly what gets companies into trouble. Let's look at the evidence. I want to start with the foundational concept of Shoshin, or beginner's mind. This was popularized in the West by Shunryu Suzuki, the founder of the San Francisco Zen Center. His famous axiom was, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the experts, there are few. This isn't about being ignorant, it's about maintaining an innovation mindset.
Okay, but let's be practical about that. If I'm hiring a chief AI officer or a CFO, I am paying a significant premium for their expert mind. I need them to know the history of market crashes, the exact boundaries of SEC regulations, the optimization curves of our models. If they walk into a board meeting with a beginner's mind and say, hey, there are infinite possibilities for our tax strategy, I'm firing them on the spot. Possibilities in a regulated environment is usually just code for risk.
That's a valid point when it comes to technical execution or compliance. You absolutely don't want a beginner pilot flying your plane. But we're talking about leadership, about strategy and disruption. Look at the relationship between Steve Jobs and Kobun Chino Otogawa. Kobun was a Soto Zen priest trained at the rigorous Eiheiji temple in Japan. He was Jobs' spiritual advisor for decades. He even presided over Jobs' wedding. Now, Jobs didn't go to Kobun for engineering advice. He went to him to learn how to see past how things should be done. The expert mind at the time said a phone has to have a physical keyboard because that's what BlackBerry did. So the expert says we need to optimize the keyboard. The beginner's mind asks, what if the keyboard didn't exist? That ability to just delete the assumption, that is the ROI of Shoshin.
You bring up Kobun Chino Otogawa. It's a legendary partnership, sure. But there is a famous anecdote about Kobun that I think actually illustrates the danger of this thinking in a business context. He was teaching a course at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, classic California setting, and he was a master of Kyudo, Japanese archery. So he sets up a target on a cliff edge over the Pacific Ocean. He takes his bow aims and fires. The arrow sails right over the target, misses it completely, and just plunges into the ocean. And Kobun looks at his shocked students and shouts, "Bullseye."
It's a beautiful story.
Is it? Or is it a story about missing your KPI? In business, if you miss the revenue target and hit the ocean, you don't get to shout bullseye. You get a shareholder lawsuit, you get a restructuring. This is exactly what I mean by business failure being framed as some kind of mystical success. It sounds profound until you look at the balance sheet.
Well, you're judging the shot by the metric of a competitive sport, not the metric of Zen. In Kyudo and in Shoshin, if you obsess over the target, your body tenses up, your focus narrows, you become rigid, and because of that rigidity, you fail. Kobun was demonstrating that the target is secondary to the presence of mind. So translate that to the economy of 2026. If a leader obsesses over the quarterly target to the exclusion of all else, they miss the huge oceanic shift in the market, like the AI wave we are in right now. Jobs understood that the product was the arrow, but the insight was the process. If you hit the quarterly target but miss the paradigm shift, you've lost the war.
That is a compelling distinction, I'll grant you that. Focusing too hard on Q1 can blind you to Q4. But let's not pretend Jobs wasn't also notoriously obsessive about details. He wasn't just letting the arrow fly into the ocean, he was screaming about the shade of beige on a plastic case. But okay, let's move on to the next pillar of your argument. You talk about resilience in this OS.
Yes, Fudoshin, the concept of the immovable mind or unmoving heart.
Immovable. I mean, in the era of agile development and pivoting, that sounds like a death sentence. It just sounds like stubbornness.
No, not at all. We have to clarify the imagery here. Historically, Fudoshin is linked to Fudomyo, that guardian deity you see in statues. He looks terrifying, surrounded by flames, holding a sword in one hand and a rope in the other. The sword is to cut through delusions and ignorance. The rope is to bind violent or uncontrolled passions. Samurai used this mental state to overcome the paralyzing fear of death in battle. It's a state of equanimity. It doesn't mean you're physically standing still. It means your mind isn't hijacked by external chaos.
Okay, but we aren't in a sword fight. We're in a market. The threats are interest rates and competitors, not katanas.
But aren't we in a battle? Look at the volatility we've seen just this month. The crypto flash crashes, the sudden displacement of entire creative industries by new image generation models. Panic is the default setting for most CEOs right now. I would frame Fudomayo not as paralysis, but as the ability to not react emotionally to a crisis. When the market crashes, the immovable mind cuts through the delusion of panic to see the actual data.
I see the utility of emotional control, sure. Panic is rarely a good strategy, but immovability implies a lack of responsiveness. In a crash, you need agility. You need to pivot. If Fudomayo is just standing there with a rope and a sword while the competition is pivoting to a new language model, well, Fudomayo is going out of business.
You're conflating internal stability with external action. The immovability is internal. The mind is stable so that the actions can be precise. If your mind is running around like a headless chicken, which is what panic looks like, you aren't pivoting, you're just flailing. You're reacting to noise. Fudoshin is exactly what allows a leader to say, the market is down 10%, but our fundamentals haven't changed. We hold. That is the sword cutting the delusion.
I can concede that point. The headless chicken strategy is definitely rampant right now. But let's talk about something I find even more difficult to justify on a timesheet. This concept of ma.
Ah, yes. Ma. The space between.
To me, this is the efficiency trap. You're essentially suggesting that doing nothing is actually a form of work.
I am suggesting that without ma, meaningful work is impossible. In the West, we view space as a void. An empty calendar slot is a defect, something that needs to be filled with a meeting. But in Japanese aesthetics and Zen, ma is a positive presence. It gives meaning to the form. Think of music. Music isn't just the notes. If you played all the notes at once without any pauses, it's just noise. It's the silence between the notes that makes the rhythm.
That's poetic, and I appreciate the musical analogy, but we're billing by the hour here. In a high-growth startup, an empty hour is wasted potential.
And that attitude is exactly why burnout is at an all-time high and why innovation is stagnant in so many large firms. I frame Ma as the ultimate 2026 productivity hack. If a leader doesn't deliberately schedule empty space, Ma, into their day, they have no room for strategic intuition. They're just processing inputs. They become routers, not leaders.
See, I come at it from a different angle. High performance requires volume. It requires iteration speed. If you look at the most successful founders, they are grinding. They are maximizing every single minute. Calling an empty hours strategic intuition sounds like a great euphemism for laziness. It sounds like a way to justify not answering emails or just slacking off.
It's the only way to answer the right emails. If you have no Ma, you are constantly reacting to noise. You're Pavlov's dog, salivating at every notification on your device. Ma allows you to step back and ask, is this notification actually relevant to our mission? That creates clarity. It's the difference between being busy and being effective.
I'm just skeptical that the average manager has the discipline to use that space for clarity rather than, scrolling social media. But let's look at the mechanism of this. You've mentioned intuition a few times. Is there any science behind this Zen OS, or are we strictly in the realm of philosophy here?
That brings us to Mushin, or no mind. And this is where the biology is really fascinating. Modern neuroscience identifies Mushin as essentially the flow state.
Okay, flow, I understand. That's Stephen Kotler, that's Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. That is a documented psychological state. That feels very distinct from religious mysticism.
They're describing the exact same biological phenomenon. When a martial artist or a CEO enters Mushin, the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain right behind your forehead responsible for overthinking, self-criticism, doubt, it actually slows down. The term is transient hypofrontality, and the basal ganglia, which handles pattern recognition and intuition, takes over.
So you're saying no mind is essentially just shutting up the inner critic so you can execute on your training.
Precisely. It allows for decision-making speeds that are physically impossible through logical calculation alone. In a sword fight, if you think, he is swinging at me, I should block, you are already dead. The signal takes too long to process consciously. In 2026 business, if you have to logically deduce every variable in an AI-driven market, you are too slow. You need that intuitive leap.
I accept the neuroscience of flow. It's efficient. But why wrap it in mysticism? We don't need to call it Mushin. We can just call it focus. Why do we need the Zen vocabulary?
Because Mushin implies a specific aesthetic and ethical dimension that focus misses. Focus can be narrow and rigid. Mushin connects to Datsuzoku, or freedom from convention. Think about the iPhone again, the removal of the home button.
Right, which drove everyone crazy for a month.
But it revolutionized the interface. That was an act of kanso, or simplicity, and Datsuzoku. It broke the rule that a phone needs a button. Now, that decision didn't come from a focus group. A focus group would have said, where is the button? That decision came from an intuitive understanding of the user's soul, a no-mind state where the device disappears and only the content remains. You don't get there by analyzing spreadsheets.
That's a compelling argument for design. But have you considered that for every iPhone, there is an Apple Newton? Intuition fails, too. I challenge the idea that no mind helps in the complex logical calculations required for, say, coding the back end of a banking app. You cannot feel your way through a ledger. You cannot intuit a compliance audit.
And I would argue, calculation is for AI. That is my central thesis. In 2026, the AI does the logic. The AI does the ledger. The AI audits the code. The human value is solely in the intuitive leap, the Mushin, that the AI cannot replicate. The AI can give you 1,000 variations of a keyboard. Only a human in Mushin can realize you don't need one at all.
This brings us to the reality of where we are right now. January 2026, the digital fog, as you call it.
Exactly. We are dealing with an infinite amount of noise. The cost of generating content has dropped to basically zero. You have AI agents spamming other AI agents.
And your solution to fighting a machine that generates 1 million tokens per second is?
Silence?
Yes.
The leader's job has shifted. It is no longer about processing data. It's about protecting clarity.
Zen is the only operating system capable of filtering that noise. If you try to process it all, you will lose.
I disagree fundamentally. You fight AI with better AI. You fight noise with better filters, better algorithms, better agents. If you retreat into silence, the market moves on without you. You are bringing a sword to a drone fight. The drone wins every time.
I see why you think that, but consider the ROI. 1 minute of Mushin, of true clarity, offers a higher return on investment than 1 hour of doom scrolling. If you spend that hour scrolling, you are exhausted, anxious, and more confused than when you started. If you spend that 1 minute in Mushin, you might realize that the entire project you're doom scrolling about is irrelevant. That is leverage.
That's a bold claim. It assumes the human mind is still the ultimate arbiter of value.
It has to be. Otherwise, what are we doing here? I mean, Silicon Valley's obsession with Japanese minimalism, the dry gardens, the meditation rooms, it isn't just an aesthetic. It's an instinctive reaction. They know, deep down, they need to cool down their own processors.
Or it's just branding. It's shibui, subtle grace, used to sell expensive hardware to people who want to feel spiritual while buying consumer electronics.
It can be both, but the utility remains.
We're nearing the end of our time, and I want to try and synthesize this. I will admit, the concept of Fudoshin, emotional stability in a crash, is valuable. We've all seen leaders crack under pressure, and it destroys value. And the neuroscience of flow, or Mushin as you call it, is undeniable. We all want to be in the zone.
But
I remain skeptical of the packaging. Business is ultimately about numbers, logistics, and hard realities. I worry that telling leaders to embrace no mind gives them a license to ignore the hard work of data analysis. We can't meditate our way out of a supply chain crisis. We need expertise, not just beginner's mind.
And I would frame it differently. I believe that in a world where AI handles the logistics and the numbers, the only human advantage left is the samurai code, the ability to see possibilities, Shoshin, the ability to create space for strategy, Ma, and the ability to act intuitively, Mushin. The hard work you're describing is being automated. The soft work of the mind is becoming the hard currency.
And that is the crux of the disagreement. Is clarity a product of reduction, of stripping things away, or is it a product of better processing?
I believe it is reduction.
And I believe we need to process faster. But we can agree on this. Whether you call it Zen or just cognitive hygiene, the ability to control your own attention is the scarce resource of this decade.
Absolutely. If you can't control your attention, the algorithms will control it for you.
So to our listeners, look at your calendar for tomorrow.
you for listening to The Debate.